guys, we are back with Aris. Is that how I say your name?
Aurous, yeah.
Aris, okay. And I'm not even going to attempt your last name, just like Swift. It is very intimidating looking.
Yeah, I mean Aurous V is fine because I mean the only other person I need to distinguish myself is Aurous Porcalaeus, and yeah. So Aurous V, I don't even know how to pronounce that last name, so I don't actually speak French that well. So
Good enough. Yeah, we won't talk about languages and accents here. So, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us when and why you started playing Eve.
yeah, thanks, Vishal. So yeah, my name is Aurous. I've been playing this game since 2009. So I started as most players do in high sec. Flying ospreys for mining back when that was a thing, and then from there moved to Providence, flying passive fit drakes for PVE and for PvP. Did a lot of small gang PvP, some industry in nullsec and sovnull, and now I've transitioned to being in low class wormholes. So the group that I'm with now, Phantom Space, we live in a class 4 wormhole, and yeah, that's where we spend most of our time. Looking for content, doing PvP, PvE, some industry as well in the wormhole, and yeah, that's who I am in a nutshell. A bit of a generalist, I would say. I've done everything in Eve with the exception of I think incursions and Podgman.
Okay, fair enough. So, of course, you're coming to us as a CSM19 candidate. You probably have 3 points that you'd like to tell everybody about.
Yeah, I mean, so I think a lot of other candidates might have specific changes that they want to see in the game. Like my platform as a representative of low class wormholes is a bit broader. So the three themes that I have, really, number one is to rebalance risk and reward in the game, give people reasons to undock and make space explosions happen. So that's one. And the other is to take a firm stance against botting. So botting is something that cheapens the experience for all of us, and I think that there are
Indeed.
some small incremental changes that can be made in the way that the mechanics of the game work to push down botting and encourage real players. And the last one is just reducing tedium. So we've all been there. We've all asked ourselves, "Hey, when I'm mining, how come I have to right-click on the ore and then click compress and then click on the compress on the compression window again to actually compress?" It's 3 clicks. Why can't it be one or two? And then that times 100 for like all sorts of different things in the game, from planetary interaction to corporation management. So the thinking here is that the less time people spend on UI tedium, the more time that they have to spend on docking and getting good fights.
Yeah, I think those are three items that pretty much anyone could get behind. For the risk and reward, what kind of ideas do you have for that?
Ideas around risk and rewards. So there. At the risk of making myself an enemy of like a lot of null block players, to say there are certain things in this game that are very easy to do, that are accessible by older players, like the higher tier PvE content, which is very lucrative but not very high in risk. Um, there's like I said, we could talk for ages about the specific kinds of changes that would happen, but like as an example, CCP recently nerfed Blue Loot in Class 5 and Class 6 wormholes, and an indirect nerf because to access the 300 million ISK that used to drop out of the drifters, now you have to use capital class ships to actually get the drifter to spawn and to get to that juicy Blue Loot. Um, and Trishal, sorry, just stop me at any time if I'm getting too much into the jargon. I know your audience, newer players. So balancing that, turning down that ISK faucet for higher class wormholes is an interesting choice, right? Because at its core, wormholes are very dangerous places to be in. When someone like rolls into the wormhole that you're trying to do a site with in Marauders or Dreadnoughts, they have a pretty good chance of killing you. In other parts of space, whether that's in Nullsec or in Pochvan, the the reward in terms of the ist faucet is still there. but the risk feels lower than it would be in, for example, high class wormholes. So that's one of the examples that I would point to say there's something there to be said about the risk and reward balance between higher tier PVE and even in lower tier PVE. We have people doing Ishtar ratting in nullsec anoms and making a modest number of isks per hour, and then we look at other kinds of equivalent PVE in, for example, class 2 or class 3 wormholes, and maybe the ISK per hour is similar, if not a little bit greater, but but sorry, the reward is similar in terms of ISK per hour, but the risk is much higher. Like if you're a praxis ratting in a C3, the chances of you dying to a hunter are much higher than if you were actively Ishtar ratting in a nullsec anom. So those are the sorts of things that I would try to get CCP to pay some attention to. And one of the reasons I'm even running is to just start conversations about those things.
Okay, very good. So let's keep in our head the comment that you made about the nerf to the C5 and C6 wormholes. We'll get back to that. Now, Eve Rookies is a community that is focused mostly on new players. So I have a couple questions. Just kind of what is your idea on the challenges that new players coming into the game today might be facing?
I could talk for hours about this subject, Kashal. The thing that mm, the one word that comes to my mind is just leverage. The amount of leverage that older players have in this game relative to new players is the gap is just it feels insurmountable at times. And this is speaking as someone who's played this game for, you know, a long time, a long time. My character has 210 million skill points. I have enough ISK to buy really whatever I wanted in the game. For a lot of new players coming in and thinking about what would it take to get to this person's level, what would it take to get to Auros's level in terms of SP and ISK, they're looking at kind of a similar path that I took, which is a couple of decades of grinding to get that much SP, to get that many skills, to get that much in terms of asset value, to do the things that I am able to do. And I think that can be demoralizing to a new player. Like trying to catch up to someone who's been playing this game for 2.5 decades is well, I mean, to say that it's a challenge is seriously an understatement. So, yeah, I think trying to put myself into the shoes of a new player, knowing full well that I'm not a new player, trying to see it from their perspective, it's a pretty steep cliff.
Hold on. Trying to run interviews while interviewing. Lots of fun. I don't recommend it. Okay, so then if you make it to the CSM, what kind of advice would you give to CCP about improving new player retention?
Improving new player retention, it's about gosh, without getting too much into real life politics, it almost feels like we're trying to raise the poverty line or to raise the minimum wage, right? How do you get new players to be interested in this game, to stick around this game, despite the fact that they are competing against players who have been in this game for over 2 decades? Um, the way that I think about this problem is it's a very complicated problem, and there's no magic bullet, silver bullet solution. But things like making it such that a new player can catch up a little bit faster, whether that's through buffs lower tier PVE, whether that's buffs to the amount of skill points that they get through the through air career rewards, really anything to try to bridge that gap, that tremendous gulf between the capabilities of a new player and the capabilities of an older player. Um, I think making that something that is CCP's focus, something that we can iteratively improve on, is something that will directly affect player retention.
Do you think that something else that may affect player retention is the fact that once they finish the career missions, they're kind of just shoved off the cliff into the great ether, and they may not talk to another player until they get blown up, or they happen to be on Reddit, or in various other places?
Well, I mean, I know you're saying that like it's a bad thing, but Trishal, like that's our number one recruitment tool, right? Is by blowing up newbies in wormhole space and then
Oh no
messaging
no
them
no
afterwards, like, hey, you wanna
no
you
blowing
wanna hang
blowing
out
up.
with us?
It's one of my pastimes. But I mean, what I'm talking about more is the engagement with other players. It takes a long time from, installing the game to, yeah, that one point.
Um, and okay, so drawing from a little bit from my own experience, having started this game, 2.5 decades ago, for the longest time, I couldn't find a really good reason to stay in the game long term. I mean, I've stopped and started this game more times than I could care to count, and the one thing that made me really sit down and buckle down and make Eve my number one hobby, my only hobby, is when I found like a community of people to play with, like a community of people that I would hop on. Back then it was Mumble, and whenever I was online, I'd hop on Mumble, and the thing that kept me going almost felt like less of the game mechanics themselves, but more of just the social relationships that you would cultivate within your own community, and that growing that organically, matching new players with the right community for them is an extremely tough thing to do. And I know CCP has iterated on that a little bit.
Yeah.
The fact that we have now the corp finder in game, select time zones and areas of interest, like that's a huge step up. Like that didn't exist when I started the game. I feel like that's past couple of years only, I think.
Yeah, I think
But it feels like,
about four
sorry,
years
go ahead.
ago. Yeah, I think it was about 4 years ago it got put in.
Right. So there's some steps towards that. There's some recognition that players start playing this game because of the cool Eve trailers that they see on YouTube or the news articles that they read about $200,000 of US dollar equivalent of ships being blown up in one battle. They come for those reasons, but they stay because they find a great group of people to fly with.
And then the loaded question, especially for someone who has played as long as you have, when was the last time you ran through the current new player experience?
Gosh, if we're talking about the one where Aura drops you into the Astero and then the Astero gets blown up,
Yes.
I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit that I haven't actually completed that whole thing. I gave up on it halfway, but I created a set of new characters for a little side project only I want to say 4 weeks ago. So about yeah, so a month ago was the last time I ran through the new player.
Okay.
So I skipped that part of it, but the part that I dove really into was looking at air career rewards
Okay.
and the tasks that those were set up. And I did all of the career agent missions. I ran through the Sisters of Eve epic arc on the new character just to see if I were starting over from scratch today. What would my first couple of weeks in the game look like? And so yeah, I went through that, and I say I was pleasantly surprised. The
Mhm.
experience was a lot better than what I remember the new player experience being back in 2009 for sure.
Did you do the career missions as well? Those career
All,
arcs?
yeah, all four of them. Yeah,
Okay.
all four, five, four.
5. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, just curious because a lot of people, new players, will skip the tutorial. I don't need this, and then they realize just how much ISK and how much in things that you get during all that.
yeah,
It's a
it's
significant
pretty
amount.
significant. Yeah, I think it was 100,000 skill points per like career in the air
Yeah.
career rewards. So, I mean that's a pretty big boost if you're just starting out from scratch.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so as you were saying earlier, that finding your people, finding your community is important. What is your definition of community in Eve?
Ooh, well, there's two layers to that. I think the foundational layer are the group of I'd say 10 to 15 people that you fly with on a day-to-day basis. You know their names, you know the ships that they fly, you know their quirks, you know their voice just by hearing it, and you know who they are. I think to me that's the sense of community that keeps me grounded in this game. That's the thing that makes me log back in, hop back into Discord, and play this game day to day. So like finding that community and then building that community, like that base layer community is very important. And then the layer above that is really everybody else that your core group is interacting with. So for me, that is everybody in wormhole space, and to an extent, the people that we run into in nullsec. So these are the people who are receptive to this playstyle of small gang PvP, who see a bunch of cruisers on DScan and think to themselves, "We should go fight that." So the wormhole community then is the second layer of, you know, those are the people that we interact with. We might not know them by name, but we know them by their reputation. We know them by their playstyle and their time zones, and yeah, we the game keeps going for us because our targets, our friends, are there for us when we need them to be.
The frenemies. Yep.
The frenemies, yeah.
So
Well, I don't even call them frenemies. Like for us, for Phantom Space at least, we don't really think of, well, I mean, maybe I shouldn't say this. There are very few groups of players out there that we would consider our enemies. We don't really we try not to hold on to grudges. And something that we say, that our corp leadership says a lot, is we shoot our friends first. It sounds kind of silly, but sometimes we get really excited when we see people like No Vacancies or Dark Venture Corporation. We just had a strap with Dark Venture earlier this morning. We saw them. We're like, "Hey, it's Dark Venture. Like, we like those guys. Let's go shoot them." Yeah. So
that's always
we,
how I feel when I find Brave, out in space. It's like, oh, these are good guys. We're gonna get a good fight.
yeah, shoot your friends first.
So, this is a question that I actually haven't asked any other candidates. Do you feel that community in Eve is only what's in the game, like in-game corporation and alliances, or do you think community can also
Well,
be out of game?
absolutely, yeah. So it's definitely community out of game is almost as important as the community in the game. And I mean, we look at this historically. Like Goonswarm as a community didn't start in the game. It started on the Something Awful Awful forums. Maybe a darker piece of history that a lot of their leadership might not want to admit to. And looking at my group and the things that we do, sometimes we'll be there, we'll be on comms with each other, and we're not playing Eve. Like we're there because we're having a chat. We're there because, hey, like these are our friends. Like I how would you say? In real life, I like to think of myself as an introvert who masquerades as an extrovert. I don't really have a lot of real life friends, as sad as that kind of sounds. Um, so the equivalent of beer buddies for me is my corp and Eve. So even if Eve weren't there, I like to think that my group of friends would still be there for me.
Okay, very cool. Uh, so the next question has to do with toxicity. Yes, it's kind of a buzzword, and when I'm talking about toxicity, especially in a game like Eve, I'm not talking about the PvP. I'm not talking about blowing up new bros, as long as you're not harassing them afterwards. I'm not talking about, these scraps and the people that do have enemies or the propaganda or, finding a reason to go and have that big fight. What I'm talking about is the racism and the discrimination and all of these unpleasant things that people take from the real world and impose on people in the game. Do you think that this is an issue in Eve?
So I think that if there are people in this game who say that's not an issue, I think they're just either either lying to themselves or not really seeing some of the things or the issues in the community for what they are. As an example, I was trying to convince some of my family and friends to play Eve because I said, "Hey, look, I have this great group of guys that I play with. We have lots of fun. We also do things outside of the game together." And they said, "No way! Like, I don't want to be associated with that community. Like, Eve Online players are crazy." To which, I mean, and you sort of see that some of the things that you see on Reddit or some of the things that you see in game. Um, let me walk that back a little bit. I should preface this by saying that the vast majority of the EVE Online player base are great people, and the vast majority of EVE Online players are not racists or sexists or homophobes or anything like that. But it feels like, as in real life, some of those people who do have those negative traits are the loudest in the community, and that is super super unfortunate. It is something that I think that the community has to recognize, that we have to band together and stand up and say that kind of behavior or that kind of language is not tolerable in polite society. Because we do want EVE Online to be a, if not a polite society, at least something that can be that other people, that new players can come in and say, I this is a community I want to be a part of. Not look at this community and the gross things that they're saying about people. Like, yeah, so it's yeah. There's definitely something there. There's something there, and I don't really know what the solution for that would be, other than for us in our community, we call out toxicity when we see it. Uh, we don't engage in any of that kind of behavior. We like in local chat, right? The thing that I say to people is like, look, the only thing that you should be saying after a fight is good fight. And if somebody's giving you salt and local, try not to engage in it. Maybe screenshot it and post it for us to see and laugh about it, but don't be a part of that. Don't be a part of that negativity. Don't be a part of that nonsense.
So then, if, say, you see people, I don't know, posting links to memes that they shouldn't be, or, being all out racist, especially, there's definitely some communities, some nationalities that people are more racist to. What do you do when you encounter? Do you report it or just
So,
ignore it?
well, I can't I can't ignore it. I mean, well, I mean, without at the risk of sounding kind of, I mean, look at who I am, right? So when I see people in game who are writing in local chat things completely inappropriate, then there's ways to report people using in-game tools. When you see people in Discord communities who are posting inappropriate things, I mean, if it's a Discord server that you have any sort of administrative privileges over, then you say to them, "That's not cool. I'm going to delete your post, and this is a warning. And if you're a repeat offender, you get kicked." So luckily, in my friend group, there's none of that kind of hostile sort of joking around. I mean, at the end of the day, we're a bunch of guys and we make jokes to each other. But it's racism in the game is something that I have run into sometimes, and I report it when I can.
Excellent. So now on to the fun questions. I have my crystal ball, and you made it to the CSM.
Oh, hooray! Fantastic.
But you get into your first meeting, and CCP reveals all to you. You get to see what the next expansion is, what's in it, maybe even for the next year, maybe even the next 2 years, or sometimes, they may reveal even a longer plan. Unfortunately, nothing you have campaigned for, nothing that you have expertise in or passion for, made it onto the docket. What do you think you're going to do?
Well, I mean, in this hypothetical scenario, CCP is only making changes to incursions and Podfin. Um, so it's okay. So I'll try to answer this question in good faith. At the end of the day, there's two different roles I see for a CSM member. One of them is being that sounding board or that member of the focus group that CCP can bounce ideas off of. I'm not going to be the person in the room to raise my hand, and spout out some uninformed opinions about what I think Podfin, what I think incursions should look like, because I honestly don't have that kind of expertise. That's fine. I mean, it's going to be disappointing that I'm not going to be able to dig into some of my in-game experience to provide advice or guidance on those fronts. But there's a second there's a second role that I would be able to fulfill as CSM, which is the community liaison, rather the community punching bag, right? So as much as I would be able to, under the confines of the non-disclosure agreement, try to let the community know kind of what's happening, the tone of the discussion, if not the items of the discussion itself. But the other thing would be something that I thought was pretty nice about Mark Resurrectus and a couple of the other CSM candidates for CSM19 was their approachability when it came to problems in the game. So there were a couple of times where the community said, "Hey, Mark, something broke in that latest update for wormholes, and this isn't working anymore. We know that you have now contacts in CCP. Like, can you bring this to their attention. Here's the bug report number. Let's try to get that on the fast track for fixing because this is something that's so important to the game. So at the very least, that avenue of the responsibility member would still be open to me. And I guess, you know, if 2025 is going to be the year of Podchvin, that's the only thing we can do.
Sounds good. So then, if you play Eve long enough, you know that they're going to axe something, or they're going to change something that you're passionate about. And this is where I said, keep in mind those C5 and C6 wormholes. If you find out that CCP wants to either alter or get rid of something that you care deeply about, your community cares deeply about, but it could actually have a positive impact for the overall game, what are you going to do?
Yeah, so I mean, this isn't a hypothetical question for a lot of us because we've lived through this.
Mm-hmm.
CCP makes a change, makes a nerf. Sometimes it's like you said, for the overall good of the game. I think back to the days in 2017 when I was hunting goon capitals in bombers. I'd fly the Falcon, and then what was that? Yeah, so at some point they changed the way that ECM works.
Mm-hmm.
The Falcon was no longer the win button, buddy. So I was like, well, what do? I mainline Falcon. Now I have to change what I fly. You can think of like several half dozen, if not a dozen, examples of there was a change that was implemented, and now my playstyle is significantly changed, if not completely destroyed. That's okay. Ultimately, like I said, I play this game not necessarily for the specific game mechanics because I'm here to have a good time with my friends. And if CCP changes something, then we adapt. We do something else. So the C5, C6 blue loot changes. Very interesting because I think it impacts low-class wormholers a little bit more than it impacts high-class wormholers. High-class wormholers always have the choice to bring capital, ratting capital ships like dreadnoughts on grid to do the drifter and still keep that amount of money flowing from. Low-class wormholers don't have that option. We cannot push dreadnoughts through any of our wormhole connections, which means that now we are essentially making half as much ISK per high-class wormhole that we find. But that's okay. We adapt. We change our routing strategy. We now deal with a couple more marauders than we are used to. We now have to have a Noctis on grid because we're generating more Rex because we're going through the sites faster. And then, if not crapping in that fashion, then we look for revenue sources elsewhere, like skyhooks, until skyhooks are removed. But then you just adapt again. Right?
Okay, so then, if a community that isn't really in your wheelhouse or isn't really your people come to you and ask for help, would you be willing to help them as CSM?
So, I think that there's the whole reason why there's 12 seats on the CSM is because there should be at least one candidate that any given player feels represented by, hopefully, as an outcome of this democratic process. I would say, at the risk of sounding like kind of a jerk, I would say it depends on who it is, right? So if it's a low class wormholer or even a new player who reaches out to me and says, Aurous, I have this problem or I have this idea for the game, can you keep it in mind for CSM? I'm like, yeah, for sure. Because you're the kind of person that I'm supposed to be representing. I'm the person who represents the people who live in low class wormholes, and I represent the prey, the neighbors that they have in the low class wormholes or adjacent to those low class wormholes. So that would be my wheelhouse. Now, if someone from Pandemic Horde or Goonswarm messaged me to say, "Hey, Aurous, there's this thing about nullsec. I have this idea about," I'd be like, maybe don't talk to me about it. Like, you have your own CSM. Most likely, you have your own CSM is going to be that person that you should be liaising with. So I guess back to your question, Kashal, like, would I be willing to help? Yes, willing to help. Possibly not directly, but if I'm not the representative that they're looking for, then I can at least point them to the representative that they are looking for.
Okay. And then the last question in the track that I really love. Players sometimes have this expectation that the CSM can fix everything, or that we can go waltzing into the boardroom demanding that, CCP, you do this or you do that. Have you given any thought on how you plan on balancing the limitations placed on you as an advisor, as well as having that, looming NDA, with making sure that players feel heard?
In my real life, I work for the government, so I think that tells you a little bit about my thoughts on, sometimes people come to you and they have problems. I'm bound by this bureaucracy to not help you directly. So that's not to say that that sounds really bad. Put it out that way. Excuse me. So the cough flares up every time I laugh. Um, so yeah, that's not what that's not what the CSM is. The CSM isn't the place where all of your good ideas shoot straight to the developers and they get coded in for the next patch. That's not how that works. That's not how any representative democracy really works, to my understanding, anyway. Um, so I think it would be disappointing sometimes. People come to the CSM with ideas, and they ultimately don't get implemented, and maybe they lambaste the CSM for that. Like, hey, how come you heard all this feedback from the community, and this thing never happened? Well, ultimately, this is CCP's game. It's not. I mean, we're a big part of it. We hope to be heard. But at the end of the day, a for-profit company has to drive their product in the way that they feel is best.
Okay, good answer. Now, some questions from my community. Multi-boxing has become a very big issue within my community in, I would say, the last year. And it's split like right down the middle. 50% are multi-boxers and, don't want to see that lifestyle go away. 50% pretty much believe that every player should have one account, only one account, maybe even axe the other two alts. And that's how you play. What is your stance on multi-boxing?
So it's one of those things where like you go from multi-boxing is a problem to multi-boxing might not be a problem and then back to multi-boxing is a problem. Okay, so this is going to be a pretty long-winded answer.
You have
First of
time.
all, if you thank you. First of all, if you took away multi-boxing from me, I think me and a whole bunch of other wormholers would simply not be able to sustain the lifestyle that we have now. Like it's just the mechanics of wormholes would be like so gruesomely punishing to players who do not have alts. Like it just you wouldn't be able to live in a wormhole realistically anymore, even as a part of a group. So, I mean, the wormholer in me says, please don't take away multi-box. But I can definitely understand that perspective. I think, especially for new players coming into this game, um, new players start out with one account. They don't have the wherewithal to be plexing a second account. They might not want to be swiping their credit card for what is a relatively expensive subscription to this game for more than one account. And then, so there they are in their single box account, looking at people who are, I don't know, multi-boxing Algoses and faction warfare. People who are multi-boxing 5 Ospreys and taking away home front sites. People who are uh, here is a great example. In wormhole space, we currently have a problem. I would say problem. I think it's a problem. Other people might think it's not a problem. It's definitely a problem. There's one person, one guy. He has around 16, 18 accounts, 10 EOSs, along with support ships. All of the sentry drones get slaved from the EOSs to the Hugin, which then target paints whichever target. And then as soon as the Hugin target paints that thing, all the sentry drones fire, it deletes that thing. And then, so that's 11 accounts. The other 5 or 6 are then Pontifexes, Nestors, other things. The Pontifexes are booshing the ball of Eoses around so they can't get caught, and the Nestors are there repping them in case they take any damage. That's one person. That one person can project more DPS than an entire, like, 20-man Ferox, which is crazy. That one person has more influence in a wormhole fight than an entire 10-man low class corp. Is that a problem? I think that's a problem. I think that multi-boxing in its extremes is it cheapens the experience for other players. That there's not much that you can do as a single boxing player against those kinds of strategies, and it can be extraordinarily frustrating. So multi-boxing is also something that ultimately is widening this gap. So I mentioned earlier, like as a new player, you're coming into this game, you don't have a lot of resources to start out with. You're trying to get caught up to filthy rich wormholers who are multi-boxing this Aurous character. And it's hard to do that. And especially hard to do that now because large skill injectors are a thing. For me and for a lot of other wormholers, purchasing large skill injectors to scale up a new account to add the sixth account to your multi-boxing setup is essentially a trivial experience because older players can grind the like high tier PvE and earn that money for those LSIs very very quickly. New players don't have that option. So now new players are not only competing against older players, but they're also competing against the accounts that older players make to multi-box. So the proliferation of multi-boxing is definitely problematic in my opinion. But in on the scale of multi-boxing to infinity is okay versus let's remove multi-boxing altogether. Neither of those extremes are good. There's a middle option there somewhere that is good. And how we get there is by introducing some friction to multi-boxing. Things like and some of the other CSN candidates mentioned that the removal of drone assist would effectively prevent that 16 boxing EOS man from doing the EOS man things. That would prevent the algoses from being so oppressive in faction warfare. It's not going to solve all the problems that multi-boxing brings, but it introduces some incentives to maybe not multi-box so hard.
Okay. So then we are going to ask you, what is the most pressing issue in Eve? Think
Yeah,
about
so
all the different issues. Is it skyhooks? Is it, the ratting and wormholes? Is it something else?
I mean it's I mean you can ask 10 different Eve players and they'll give you 10 different answers. Yeah, for nullsec players or small gang players, it'll be skyhooks. For faction warfare players, it's going to be the algos thing. For me, really, the thing that not worries me, but the thing that does make me think a lot about the future of this game is that PCU count. So the peak concurrent users, it's been going down slightly since 2010. That's not a nice thing to see. So you have fewer players logged in at any given time. An increasing proportion of them, anecdotally, feel like multi-boxers. That means there are fewer new players. There are fewer new players coming into this game, fewer replacement new blood for the people who are leaving this game. That's concerning. So I think for me, that's problem number one. So getting new players in, retaining new players. For me, that's probably the number one pressing issue for.
Okay. So at this time, I would like to tell Twitch if you have any questions for Aris, you can start frantically typing them in, and we'll get to you in a second. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you still want to talk about?
For me, yeah. Other than saying the standard pitch of like, look, try low class wormholes. I know it's not. It doesn't feel like at first something that's very accessible for new players. Wormholes are scary. There's no local. There's no Concord to protect you in case something goes awry. But I promise, there's riches out there to be harvested by pilots with the right personality matrix. For the people who think that, look, maybe get rich or die trying is a good motto to have for them after. Um, so yeah, come try it out. The more people are in low class wormholes, the more fun I have because I like to shoot people in low class wormholes. But I honestly believe that wormhole space is a place where people can really find a good footing in this game. They can find a good group of players to play with. It feels so much different from being in high sec or being in null sec. In high sec, you can join a group, and you realistically can be in a fleet with someone without having talked to them on voice forever. Because well, what is there to talk about other than move over to that other Veldspar rock? And in nullsec, you're in comms if you're on Stratop with literally 150 other people, and the FC tells you shut up and don't talk because you know
Chaos.
combat comms,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, it would be chaos if everybody could talk. And I think Wormhole space is one of those few places where everything that you do in your group matters. Like your presence really matters. Everything that you do, every hole that you scan and bookmark for your team, every ship that you fly, everything that you do matters to both you and to your corporation. So, yeah, I hope to see more people trying out wormholes. And um, bit of an anecdote. We had someone fly into our space. I think it's like a scanning buzzard or something, looking for data and relic sites. We killed him. We convoed him. He seemed to be really cool on chat. He was asking for advice, and we invited him on to our Discord just to chat. Right? Wasn't exactly a recruiting attempt or anything like that, but and we gave him advice. And at the end of it, a few people mentioned, yeah, like I sent him some money, and we're like, what? And we asked around everybody who was in that chat, and we tried to tally it up. And in total, I think we gave this one Buzzard pilot who lost a 60 million ISK ship something to the tune of half a billion ISK between all of us because we didn't really coordinate. Like, who's going to reimburse this guy for? Eh. But yeah, that guy, that pilot, made off with more money in that interaction than he could have spent like in half a week trying to do wormhole stuff. So and there's something to be said about the ISK per hour of interacting with.
Absolutely. So, how old, like in game time, should a player be in order to realistically be able to live in a wormhole?
To live in a wormhole. Okay, that's a really tough one. To live in a wormhole, living in a wormhole is tough, and unless you have a group. If you have a group, everything becomes easier. And there are nullsec SIGs like Spoopy Newbies. Eve University has a wormhole campus. These organizations are accessible to new players realistically from day one. You're not gonna have as much fun on wormhole fleets. You're not gonna have as much fun doing wormhole PVE as you would be if your character was, say, like 2 or 4 months old. But yeah, joining a group and living in a wormhole is something that's doable day one. I don't recommend it for everybody because it is like the fire hose of information that you would have to learn to be able to navigate yourself in wormholes. That's pretty tough. So getting a grasp on game mechanics in high sec first is definitely recommended before trying to dive into wormholes. But living solo in wormholes is, and this is something that is a challenge for players who are years or even decades. I personally never recommend to anybody solo living in wormholes. It is quite tedious having to scan down a chain all by yourself. It is quite frustrating when die to PvP and can't get back to your wormhole. Station defenses and that are essentially impossible as a solo player. Wormhole space is something that highly encourages a tight knit group of anywhere from 5 to 20 players to band together and build up their own little part of the neighborhood.
So, does a
Um,
player have to be Omega in order to successfully, navigate wormholes?
I could be wrong. I think gas harvesters require Omega. I don't know. This is something to check. Um, I would say there isn't an alpha player in my corp, and you would be hard pressed to find a low class like a tight knit wormhole corp that would take alpha players, because the alpha limitations put you is you can't use the Tech 2 co-op ships. I think
No.
you also can't use cloaks.
Nope.
There's a whole bunch of things that make it very difficult for alpha players to live in wormholes. But yeah, it is. I guess in that way, wormholes can be kind of exclusionary to like very, very new players. Um, but ultimately, like once you get some experience in the game and once you know a little bit about what you're doing, I the wormhole space is as good as any other.
Okay, so we do have some questions that came in. At some point, you had mentioned about getting new players into Corps, and Chaotic Story wants to know how do we get new players into Corps?
Kill them first. Kill them in wormhole space, and then combo them. Chaotic stories in my corp. So
Ah, the secret is out.
yeah. Like honestly, wormhole recruitment is tougher. Like I said, like low class wormholes the community is fairly fragmented. Apart from posting on Eve Jobs, which is something that on Reddit rather, the subreddit Eve Jobs. Sometimes you'll see Wormhole Corps recruiting from there. For a lot of tight knit communities, honestly, like sometimes it just so happens that you have a fight with someone and you think, wow, that guy really stepped up. He shouldn't have taken that fight, but he did, and that's the kind of attitude that our corp is looking for. More than one of our current corp leadership members were recruited in that way. Like, kill him first, and then message him afterwards. Be like, hey, what was that about? Like, oh, you seem pretty cool. You want to fly with us? Yeah, wormhole recruitment to me feels very organic in that way.
Let's see. Doesn't look like we have any other questions. Last chance, guys. I'm going to let this poor guy go in a few minutes so he can go rest, relax, recover his voice for his next interviews. Okay, so where else can people find you if they want to continue the conversation?
Yeah, so I'm very active on Reddit, chronically on social media. My Reddit handle is TwitchyBat, so I occasionally will make posts or post my funny videos on Reddit. So I keep an eye on my Reddit inbox too, so people can message me on Reddit. On Discord, I'm in Discord now. I'm also at other Discords, wormhole communities, including Warm Life Reports, Praise Bob Discord, and a couple of other ones. Yeah, so I'd like to think I respond in a timely manner to all of my Discord DMs or Reddit messages. So, and the other thing is in-game mail. I'm chronically on this game. I have 23,000 hours in Eve since 2016. It's a lot of time I'm spending in the game. So if you send me an Eve mail, I will see it because I'm always in the game. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Oh, somebody wants to know if a Hecate can beat an endurance.
Yes, unless that endurance has a whole bunch of friends. Sometimes the endurance will burn away from you at 4,000 meters per second while having pointed, and his buddies come in and then blap you. And that's the thing in wormhole space. Right? It's always bait. That prospect is bait. That coveter is bait. Everything is bait. That Praxis ratting in the C3, that's bait. But the other rule in wormhole space is never not take bait.
Yep, absolutely. And fun fact, an Astero can take an endurance as well. I've done it. Okay. Anybody else? Last chance. Like last chance. Okay, I'm going to take it that they're done with you. So thank you so much for coming and talking to us. I really appreciate it. You have some very interesting views, and I think that people are going to enjoy the video, which will go up on YouTube tomorrow.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'll link to that video on my Discords and my campaign post. I want to thank you, Kashal. I know it's a heavy lift interviewing. It's a lot of work that you're putting yourself through, so I sincerely appreciate that.
Not a problem. I think it's really important that CSM get their voices heard. You know, the candidates during the elections. This will be my third cycle self, and I can tell you that, you know, talking for people that don't really have a voice, since alpha accounts can't vote, you know, finding those platforms to get out to people is so important. So,
right on.
It's my pleasure. So thank you. I'm going to let you go. Feel better, and we shall talk soon. Best of luck in your campaigning.
Thanks, Kashal. Same to you. Bye now.
Bye-bye.